I saw with my own eyes Nick speaking to his father in an openly disrespectful way. These were Conan O'Brien's words, and they didn't just describe an argument. They hinted at something far darker. One Christmas night, a gathering meant for laughter and warmth became the stage for tension no one could ignore. Guests sensed it immediately, even before a single raised voice broke the fragile calm. Nick didn't just drift through the crowd. He moved with a quiet intensity, observing, measuring, challenging. Reiner, normally composed, seemed weighed down by an invisible pressure. No one could stop what was unfolding, and yet everyone felt an unease creeping silently, unnoticed until it was too late. What really happened between father and son that night? Was it a momentary clash, or the start of something far more serious? Conan stayed silent for years, holding on to what he saw, what he felt in that room. The truth isn't simple, and it's not just about words spoken. It's in the shift of glances, in the change of atmosphere, in the fear that even friends couldn't ignore. Stay with us, because tonight we reveal what truly happened. And the story is more shocking than anyone could have imagined. The Christmas party that wasn't ordinary. The house was alive with the familiar sounds of a holiday celebration, laughter, the soft clinking of glasses, and the faint scent of pine lingering in the air. Yet that night, something felt different. Guests arrived expecting the usual warmth, a rare evening away from cameras, flashing lights, and the relentless gaze of Hollywood. Conan O'Brien had always cultivated this space as a sanctuary, a place free from gossip, a temporary escape where friends could relax, speak freely, and enjoy each other's company. But this night, even before a single word was spoken, the air was charged. Nick Reiner didn't mingle. He moved deliberately, slowly, quietly, his presence more felt than noticed. He didn't laugh at jokes, he didn't stop to chat, and he didn't join small clusters of friends. Every glance he cast seemed to carry weight, as if he were silently measuring the people around him, cataloging reactions, and assigning unseen value to each expression. Guests remembered later that it was an unsettling feeling, subtle but persistent, like a shadow creeping through the corners of the room. There was a tension that could not be ignored, a sense that the evening would not unfold as expected. Reiner entered beside his son, attempting composure, yet every movement betrayed a hidden strain. Even casual observers could see the difference in his posture, the way his eyes swept across the room, not for enjoyment, but to take stock, to ensure all appeared normal. He greeted familiar friends, smiled lightly, nodded politely, yet there was an edge to each gesture, a weight in every laugh, as though he carried an invisible burden on his shoulders. Something deeper than ordinary holiday stress lingered, and it settled into the room like a quiet fog. The contrast between father and son was impossible to ignore. Rob's composure could not fully mask the pressure within him. Nick's quiet intensity, on the other hand, was magnetic in a way that made everyone uneasy. He did not need words to command attention. The stillness of his movements, the precision in his glances, and the calculated way he moved across the room spoke volumes. Small gestures, a slight tightening of a glass in Rob's hand, Nick's slow, purposeful pacing, the way he briefly paused to look at each guest layered the air with tension, unspoken, yet palpable. Friends later recalled the odd energy that night. There was no shouting, no arguments erupting, yet a silent discomfort filled the space. Conversations were attempted, but people often found themselves drawn back to the corner where father and son stood, sensing the invisible tug of conflict. The Christmas party, meant to be joyful and carefree, had already transformed into something far more complicated, a delicate dance of observation, unspoken challenge, and quiet worry. Even the smallest moments carried weight. A smile shared between friends, a sip of drink, a polite nod seemed to exist under the shadow of the tension brewing nearby. Every glance Nick gave Rob felt charged, every word or gesture seemingly loaded with meaning. The night had begun like any other, yet by its first hour, it was unmistakable. The quiet shift had taken hold. This was no ordinary gathering. It was a subtle battlefield, a stage where emotions, fear, and unspoken conflicts silently collided. A Christmas party unlike any other, already overshadowed by anticipation, anxiety, and the heavy presence of an unspoken battle that had quietly begun to unfold, sparks of conflict. The first words that drew attention were not loud. They were quiet, measured, deliberate, but heavy with meaning. Nick Reiner spoke to his father in a calm voice, carefully chosen, each phrase carrying an unspoken challenge. At first, his comments seemed ordinary, even polite. Yet, beneath that surface, every question and observation quietly tested the boundaries Rob had long relied on. Guests sensed it immediately. Something delicate, almost invisible, was beginning to unravel. What had once been restrained, carefully hidden emotions were now surfacing, subtle but impossible to ignore. Rob responded with equal care. His words were measured, his tone gentle, attempting to preserve calm. But those who watched closely noticed the difference. His smiles were fleeting, almost forced, and there was a tension in his eyes that betrayed a concern he could not hide. The usual ease he carried into social settings was absent. Each nod, each polite acknowledgement, seemed calculated to keep control, but the undercurrent of worry was palpable. Something important, fragile, was beginning to fracture before the eyes of everyone present. Michelle Reiner tried to intervene. Her hand rested lightly on Nick's arm, her voice soft, almost pleading. She asked him to hold back, to reconsider the timing and place, but her presence did little to stop the momentum. Nick's gaze remained calm, yet sharp and deliberate, a quiet intensity that froze the air around him. Guests later recalled the sensation vividly. An invisible pressure hung over the room, as though time itself had slowed. This was no ordinary disagreement. It was purposeful, measured, and ominously deliberate. The conversation moved gradually from casual remarks to heavier topics, the kind of subjects that touch on family decisions, control, and legacy. Nick's voice remained steady, almost detached, yet each word carried weight. It was subtle, yet commanding. Rob tried to respond gently, attempting to guide the discussion toward calmer ground, but Nick resisted, softly, persistently. The tension grew without dramatic outbursts, creating a strange dissonance. Guests described it later as watching a storm approach, while the sky remained deceptively clear. The room, once warm with laughter and celebration, now felt like a silent battlefield. By the end of the evening, the impact of that conversation lingered. It had left a mark that would not fade easily. Guests recalled leaving with a sense of unease, a subtle heaviness in their chests. The night had begun as any other holiday gathering, yet it had quietly transformed into a window into deeper struggles, fears, frustrations, and conflicts that had been suppressed for years. The first sparks of tension had ignited into something far more serious, a silent clash that carried consequences beyond the party itself. It was the kind of moment that stayed with people, an unspoken warning that not all peace is as it appears. The human angle, fear and helplessness. What stood out most that night was not the words themselves, but the emotions that hung heavy in the room. Rob Reiner's fear was not tied to reputation, nor to the usual pressures of public life. It was the raw, instinctive fear of a parent who suddenly realizes that control is slipping, that the person he has spent years trying to protect is moving beyond his reach. Guests noticed the subtle signs almost instinctively: the tightening of his fists, the faint tremor in his hands, the way his eyes darted briefly to others, as if seeking reassurance, as if silently asking, "Am I alone in this?" Each movement, each gesture carried meaning, revealing a struggle that words could never fully capture. Conan O'Brien observed quietly from a distance, taking in the atmosphere with the patience of someone who had seen much, but not this. He later described the moment as one where love, authority, and reason seemed powerless. The usual structures that held relationships together, communication, guidance, even affection, were failing under the quiet, inexorable weight of conflict. Every observer could feel it, a tension that pressed on the room like a dense, invisible fog, settling over conversations, laughter, and familiar rituals, slowly muting them. For Nick Reiner, anger and frustration were expressed not in volume or chaos, but in calm, deliberate actions that radiated an unspoken intensity. He did not shout. He did not gesticulate wildly, yet every glance, every measured step, carried emotional weight. It was a controlled force, precise yet unsettling, and guests were struck by it. There was fear in the air, yes, but it was mingled with helplessness, a quiet anxiety that any attempt to intervene could make things worse. People shifted, whispered, glanced nervously at each other, unsure how to respond to the growing gravity of the situation. The human side of this conflict revealed itself most clearly in the small details. Rob's careful tone, chosen to preserve calm, Michelle's gentle, almost pleading attempts to mediate, Nick's calculated movements, scanning, measuring, positioning each interaction, all these were parts of a silent struggle, a negotiation of power, of authority, of unspoken resentment played out without dramatic gestures, yet with a force that was impossible to ignore. Each participant acted in private, carrying their own fears and frustrations, yet the room collectively felt the weight of it. Conan later reflected that the true shock was not the argument itself, but the helplessness it revealed. It was the recognition that some situations cannot be controlled, no matter how much love, care, or patience is applied. It was a lesson in human fragility, a glimpse into the vulnerability of those who care deeply, yet find themselves powerless. The fear, tension, and uncertainty lingered long after the party ended, leaving a mark that would remain in the memories of everyone present. The evening had become a quiet study of human emotion, of anxiety, despair, and the fragile balance of relationships under pressure. Escalation and key turning points. As the evening wore on, the tension in the room did not ease, it deepened. Nick Reiner's words grew more pointed, yet he spoke with a calm, almost measured tone. He addressed topics that carried weight, bringing up family decisions, financial matters, and questions of personal influence. Each remark was precise, quiet, yet charged with deliberate challenge. Guests could feel it in the air. Every sentence seemed to carry consequences, subtle but undeniable. There was no shouting, no dramatic display, yet the gravity of the conversation was unmistakable. Rob Reiner responded with patience, carefully weighing each response. But behind the composure, fatigue showed. He knew that any misstep, any visible reaction could push the situation further toward an irreparable breaking point. Observers later described a strange slowing of time, as though the room itself had become suspended in tension. Laughter and clinking glasses faded into the background, replaced by a quiet awareness that something irreversible was unfolding. Michelle Reiner attempted to mediate, placing a soft hand on Nick's arm, her voice gentle and hesitant. She asked him to pause, to consider the timing and place, but her words barely made a dent. Nick's focus never wavered. His calm demeanor, combined with sharp, deliberate glances, kept the room under an invisible pressure. Every guest sensed it. This was no ordinary argument. The dynamic between father and son had become a quiet, intense struggle, one that pulled attention and energy from every corner of the gathering. By the end of the night, the party no longer resembled a celebration. The air had shifted, heavy with unspoken conflict. Every smile exchanged between guests, every polite nod, seemed layered with meaning, a silent acknowledgement of the undercurrent in the room. The subtle shifts in power, the quiet tension, and the careful calculations of both Rob and Nick transformed what should have been a joyful holiday evening into a scene of almost palpable confrontation. It was as if the room itself was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable to surface. Conan O'Brien's later reflections captured the essence of the turning point. He realized that this was more than a disagreement. What he witnessed that night was the visible manifestation of years of suppressed struggles and unresolved emotions. The conversation, calm yet charged, revealed deep fractures in relationships that had been carefully maintained for decades. Each moment, each carefully chosen word, carried the weight of history, of expectations, and of disappointments left unspoken. It was a quiet but undeniable warning. The seeds of tragedy were already present. The evening that began with promise, warmth, and celebration had become a stark reflection of tension, fear, and vulnerability, the kind that lingers in memory long after the room has emptied. The night before tragedy. When the party finally drew to a close, the Reiner family departed in silence. There were no lingering laughs, no casual goodbyes, no warm gestures that usually marked the end of a gathering. Instead, there was a heavy, almost suffocating sense of tension that seemed to hang over the room long after the door had closed behind them. Guests remained for a while, unsure whether to speak or leave, their thoughts preoccupied with the unusual energy of the evening. Conan O'Brien later described it as a presence that felt almost physical, a weight pressing down on everyone in the room, a sensation that refused to dissipate even as people tried to return to their conversations. In the days that followed, small details began to emerge that shed light on what had been witnessed that night. Nick Reiner's long history of mental health struggles and periods of addiction provided context for his behavior. Friends and acquaintances spoke of recurring challenges, moments of instability, and repeated attempts to seek help, painting a picture of a young man caught in cycles that were difficult to break. What had seemed at the party like a subtle tension, a carefully controlled intensity, was now understood as a sign of deeper turmoil, quietly growing beneath the surface, unacknowledged yet impossible to ignore. Conversations with family members, close friends, and observers revealed a consistent pattern. This was a family under enormous strain. Attempts to mediate, to guide, or to calm conflicts had existed in fragments, but no single effort had bridged the growing divide. Each interaction, no matter how gentle, seemed to reveal fractures that had been hidden behind smiles and polite manners. Observers reflected on how ordinary moments, raising a glass, nodding politely, passing through the room, had been loaded with meaning, with unspoken fears and warnings that few could articulate at the time. The party had unintentionally become a reflection of these deeper fractures. Love and hope coexisted with tension and fear. Authority and care were present, but their influence seemed insufficient against the undercurrent of unresolved resentment, and unspoken conflict. For those paying attention, the signs were there. A subtle yet undeniable foreshadowing of events that would soon spiral beyond anyone's control. What began as a social gathering, meant to celebrate the holiday and the warmth of friendship, had quietly transformed into a mirror of vulnerability, human fragility, and the unseen pressures that can build over time. By the end of the evening and into the next days, it became painfully clear that the night had been a turning point. The tension observed was not fleeting. It had planted the seeds of a tragedy that would soon unfold. The Reiner family's struggles, the quiet warnings embedded in gestures, glances, and silences, all pointed toward an impending crisis. The Christmas party, with its lights and laughter now tinged with memory, had become a microcosm of fear, helplessness, and the weight of human vulnerability. An evening that foreshadowed a moment no one would ever forget. The story of Rob and Nick Reiner, as observed by Conan O'Brien, is a reminder of the fragility of human relationships. A simple holiday gathering revealed tensions, fears, and emotions that had been simmering for years. It wasn't just an argument. It was a display of human vulnerability, the limits of control, and the unpredictable nature of conflict. As the investigation continues and more details emerge, one thing remains clear. The events of that night were a warning of what can happen when suppressed emotions reach a breaking point. Guests, family, and friends were left helpless, witnessing the impact of years of tension in a single evening. Thank you for staying with us until the end. If this story made you reflect, leave a comment. The full truth of that night, the emotions, the fear, and the aftermath will continue to unfold here, and you won't want to miss a moment.